Now, this week I saw something very concerning on the front page of the West Australian newspaper. There was an image of a young boy with the headline, "How we stop this kid becoming a monster." Really? Cool. This was all to stop domestic violence lessons at schools to address the menace of toxic masculinity, according to that front page. But really, what a disgraceful front page. These sort of attacks against boys and young men under the guise of tackling domestic violence are not only idiotic and damaging, but they are counterproductive. The headline comes as West Australia's Education Department puts the final touches on a suite of new curriculum materials focused on teaching kids about respectful relationships, domestic violence, consent and gender equality. Joining me now is Senior Fellow at the Australian Catholic University, Kevin Donnelly. Kevin, what's your response to that front page? And tell me, how are boys doing in school at the moment, particularly when compared to girls? And I'm talking about from primary school all the way to higher education.
Thank you, Rita. I mean, when I saw that front page, I was shocked. I think it's appalling. It didn't surprise me in a way. I mean, you might remember, I think you wrote about it. In Melbourne, there was an example of a school where young boys were made to stand up at assembly and apologise for being male. It's part of this movement now where it adopts a deficit model where it's all about toxic masculinity. What we should be doing is giving a positive view to young boys in primary school, to boys in secondary school, what in America they call virtuous masculinity. We should not be really pulling it down in terms of telling them all the time that they're the problem. And as you know, if you're looking at NAPLAN results, Year 12 results across Australia, girls are doing it better. The whole curriculum, and I was involved in a review in 2002, has been feminised. So it's all positive discrimination in favour of girls, and boys are being left behind.
But we have had women outnumber men at Australian universities for decades now, I think from the 80s. So this isn't a new phenomenon, and yet it seems to be of no concern to anybody in education that boys are really struggling, particularly the fact that they're struggling compared to girls in primary school and high school. I mean, if it was the other way around, we would have all sorts of programs to address that disadvantage, Kevin.
That's exactly right, Rita. And I mentioned that Commonwealth review in 2002. What we found out was during the 70s and 80s, in the 90s, there was that whole movement towards feminising the curriculum, a positive program for girls, which is well and good, but we ignored the problem that the pendulum moved so far towards girls that boys were being left out. And that's been happening for 20, 30 years now. And we see that also what happens after school, after university. If you look at young boys, young men, they have a very high rate of anxiety, of depression, of suicide, an appalling statistic, because we now live in an education system and a society where we're not giving young men a strong sense of affirming them being positive, what I call virtuous masculinity.
Yes, I mean, you would never talk to girls about something like toxic femininity. We wouldn't split femininity into toxic and positive, but we do that routinely with boys. Even at boys' schools, there is just constant messaging around toxic masculinity. Even if it's well-meaning, it can be terribly damaging. Kevin Donnelly, thank you so much for your time this evening. Appreciate it.